Hi, welcome back to Jews and the History of Messianism. I'm Rabbi Sandy Zisser. This is Unit 4. We're talking about three different false messiahs today: Moses of Crete, Serenus, and Abu Isa. The first false messiah we are going to look at today, his name was Moses, not the Moses from the Torah, but the Moses of Crete. So Crete, you ask? Yes. The island country of Crete is a island that has definitely had connections to Jewish populations. We do have a Jewish population in Crete at the time that Moses of Crete appears and claims to be a prophet sent by God to return the Jews to Jerusalem. So what makes this time ripe, we ask? So the Roman Empire and the Byzantine Empire both had subsequently owned Crete, ruled over Crete, and the Jewish community of Crete under both empires was suffering a lot of discrimination, and the time seemed right for the appearance of a new Messiah. There's also a Talmudic prediction that 85 Jubilee years would have to pass before the Messiah appears. And that puts us somewhere in the year 450 to 500. And that prediction holds pretty true for the concept of the time period we're looking in. So, whatever the calculation is, in 440, there's a man named Moses, at least that's the name he uses, in Crete, who appears and begins a year-long trek across the island country, preaching to the Jewish communities. And he claims that he's a prophet sent by God to return the Jews to Jerusalem. What's interesting is that, of course, he picks the name Moses. I'm assuming that's not his real name, to mimic the biblical Moses that had promised to take the Jews to the promised land. Now, this Moses of Crete actually promises to send or to take the Jews from Crete to Jerusalem via the same way that the Moses from the Torah brought the Jews from Egypt to freedom. Yes, by splitting a sea. So unlike Moses in the Torah, whether it be the Sea of Reeds or the Red Sea, Moses of Crete, if you think of geography, Crete, the island country, is separated from Israel, or Judea at the time, by the Mediterranean Sea. So Moses of Crete's promise to the Jews of Crete was that he would have the sea split, the Mediterranean Sea split, and all the Jews could walk from Crete to Jerusalem on dry land. So one would think, if you and I were thinking about this, we'd be like, that's funny, right? That's never going to happen, obviously. Who would think about that? Well, ironically, the time is so ripe and the people are so in need of saving in Crete that masses of people believe him. In fact, almost the entire Jewish population of Crete believes him. And through his preachings and teachings across the country, he persuades the Jews of Crete to ignore their business affairs, to give up their wealth, because why would you need your wealth in the Messianic era? And of course, as a sidebar, he said, you might as well give your wealth to me because you're not going to need it. Okay. And they do. They give him their wealth. They ignore their businesses. They hand over their wealth to this Moses. And eventually, on a set day, they all assemble on the cliffs overlooking the sea, waiting for the miracle. Now, if we take a pause here for a second and remember the Torah description of the parting of the sea, you have the concept that Moses goes, raises his staff, the sea parts. Well, the Talmud, the rabbis in the Talmud, actually put a spin on that with a midrash. And that's where the midrash of Nachshon ben Aminadav comes, where Moses, the Talmud says, doesn't actually part the sea, but in fact, it's only until someone jumps in and shows their loyalty and devotion to God that the sea actually splits. And not just jumping in, but the water has to just go above their nostrils as if they're going to drown. And as the Midrash says, the sea split. So I tell you that here because, you guessed it, Moses of Crete says clearly, for us to have the parting of the sea, he needs his followers to trust him and jump into the Mediterranean. I know what you're thinking. I wouldn't do it either. But again, they were so desperate for the Messiah that a majority of his followers listened to him and they jump in. Many of them actually drowned. He, of course, stays on dry land with all their possessions as well. It came to a point that some Cretan fishermen that were out on their boats noticed this mass jumping into the water and started saving people. And most of the survivors actually convert to Christianity after being devastated that they were tricked by this false Messiah. So what happens to Moses of Crete? Well, unfortunately, it's sort of vague. Some say he was captured and tortured. Some just say he disappeared. Either way, he was never actually heard from again. So he disappears with the wealth of all of his followers. So our second Messiah, if you didn't think that Moses of Crete was sketchy enough, our next Messiah could actually be even worse. So it's about 720, and this guy comes on the scene in Syria, declares he's the Messiah, but unfortunately, the documentation that we have, he goes by several different names. He was sometimes called Serenus, he was sometimes called Saur, he was sometimes called Zoraniah, he was sometimes called Severus, he's sometimes called Serene. So it's very interesting because all of them, all of his names, could actually just be a adaptation on the word Syria itself. So basically, he is really seen a bit sketchy, to me at least, but he is actually taken seriously by the Jews of Syria. Now, what we know of Serenus is that originally he is Christian and converts to Judaism. So obviously, you might think that that outlaws him entirely from being the Messiah. Okay, but so as the story goes, Serenus is found after seducing a Sumerian girl, a Sumerian Jewish girl, and is publicly rebuked and humiliated and ashamed. And as the legend goes, he vows vengeance against the Jewish community, and most probably then comes up with this scheme to carry out his decree of vengeance by posing as the Messiah. Now, hindsight is beautiful. We could see that from the history of it, but I'm sure the Syrian Jews at the time had zero clue. So what he does, he goes around the city of Mardin in Syria, which is Kurdistan now, or was, depending. I would say what modern day Kurdistan was in that region. Maps are interesting, huh? Geography is worse. So Cerinus claims to be the Messiah in Mardin, and he quickly develops actually a strong following, and his popularity is pretty close to the fact that this culture, this community in Syria, the Jews are very much so looking for excuses to have the Messiah. And what's interesting at this time is that the Muslim authorities in Syria began to relax restrictions on the Jewish community and gave them more autonomy. And because of it, the Jews developed a more wealthy and more educated community over the years. And because of that, they began to have anti-Talmudic and anti-rabbi sentiment because they had access to the teachings themselves, and some were making up their own decisions. And Cerinus, obviously, because wouldn't you, capitalized on this. And because the Jewish myth, the Jewish Messiah myth, says that there would be that the Messiah would bring a Torah-based living, right? That's anti-rabbinic and anti-Talmudic. So since that was one of the myths or one of the ideas, he capitalizes on that, and he actually begins by abolishing many of the rabbinic laws, including fixed prayer, second days of holidays, the laws of kashrut, the ritual purity laws, and laws that are concerning marriage contracts. And what's very interesting is that people eat it up because they really believe that he is the Messiah. So he is amassing popularity, and at one part, he announces that he is actually ready to bring the Messianic era immediately to the people. And he promised that he would miraculously fly everyone back to Israel. Of course, the Jews of Syria, longing to have a better life and wanting to believe in the Messianic age, believe him. Word spreads like wildfire about him. And Jews as far as France and Spain sell their belongings and come to Syria to be part of the new Messianic era that Cerinus is going to be instituting. But this moment of enormous popularity that he must have loved actually leads to his downfall, because what occurs is that the Muslim rulers of Syria hear what's going on, and they were okay with religious tolerance to a point, but not this, not foreign groups coming in and giving away their wealth, and the Arab population not receiving any of it, right? So they arrest Cerinus and seize all of the wealth that he is amassing. So at this moment, the Messiah himself is arrested. So now we again go to records for the rest of the story, and there's a conflict of what happens. So some people say that Cerinus actually admitted to the Caliph that he was not the real Messiah and that he only had intentions of misleading and getting revenge on the Jewish community. And some say that the Caliph then turns him over to the Jewish community and they take care of him and they punish him and kill him. There's another account that Cerinus was captured by the Muslims, and he does admit that he is the Messiah, and they put him to a test. And the test is that they were going to execute him, and a miracle should happen if he's the Messiah, and God would come and save Cerinus. And in fact, that doesn't work. So those are two actually conflicting accounts of what happens, but the end result is actually the same. The end result is that Cyrenius dies. And when he dies, either at the hands of the Jewish community or the Muslim leadership, either way, what happens is that the movement dies with him. But again, you have the Syrian Jews and even the Jews in Spain and France at the time who are so willing to believe someone because they're so willing to have the Messianic era come about and look for redemption that they are willing to go through these extremes. Now, the folks who follow Cyrenius actually go back and refollow rabbinic law, and everything's mostly okay. And our third false prophet for today, Abu Isa, he is from Persia, current Iran. The year is around 750. He first appeared in Isfahan, Persia, claiming that he was the last of the line of great prophets and about to bring the Messianic age. Now, the interesting thing here, he declares that God had appeared to him and told him that he would be greater than all the other prophets. He describes himself as the Messiah, and his followers believe that he actually is. But much like all the other false prophets we have, he is not a descendant from the line of David. He actually is an uneducated craftsman from the countryside, and in fact has no real promise at actually being the Messiah. So what makes him be that is, again, the need for the people, the Jewish communities, to have a savior. An interesting piece of Abu Isa is that he says that Muhammad, Jesus, Moses were all prophets of God, and he is in that long line of prophets and is actually the best version of all of them. And what does he do as the Messiah to these people in Persia? Is that he imposes very strict standards for religious practice. He prohibits the eating of milk and drinking of alcohol. He abolishes divorce. He increases the amount of daily prayer from 3 times a day to 7 times a day. So he actually is showing that he is very much the traditional Jewish Messiah. He actually, based on the writings that we have and the history we have from him, is that it seems that he is borrowing elements from Christian and Muslim stories about messianic times. So he demands personal piety from his followers, like Jesus does. Right? He is able to write books and put out his religious beliefs, except despite the fact that he's actually an illiterate artisan from the countryside and has no real formal education. And these are traits that Muhammad and Jesus had, and it seems that he's actually taking them. But one of the interesting things is that his followers, after he produces these documents of his doctrine, his worshipers see that as a miracle, that here's this uneducated, illiterate person who's able to produce these works, as opposed to thinking, oh, he just stole them from somewhere or adapted them from somewhere or someone else wrote them. So also, what he asks his followers to do is actually to read the Gospels and the Quran for the wisdom that they contained. And he doesn't say that Jesus and Muhammad were prophets greater than him, but he says to read those works so that they can gain insight. Now, obviously, by that understanding alone, it should disqualify him. Forget about everything else that may have disqualified him already. But the fact that the Messiah is supposed to bring about this age of Torah law, why, as a follower, you might question, well, why are you having me read the Gospels and the Quran? By the way, side note, if you have not read the Quran or the Gospels yet, as a Jewish leader, you need to know them. This is a total sidebar. You need to know them. The material needs to be understood and learned so dialogues can happen. End sidebar. And according to record, there are several other miracles that Abu Isa's followers believe actually happened. It was said that he traveled to the 10 lost tribes of Israel and found them, and that they were waiting for the Messianic era to arrive. Another real strange miracle that they believed was that when he went into battle with his followers, he would draw a line in the sand or in the ground, and it would protect his men from the enemy. Now, obviously, these are stories that can be seen as adaptations of other myths and other beliefs that were around at the time. So what actually leads to Abu Isa's downfall? Well, what's interesting is that the details of this come about 400 years later, actually from Rambam, because he has a letter that he writes to Yemen, and what it is, it's a letter warning the people of Yemen against false messiahs. And so in the 12th century in Yemen, apparently, there was another messiah that was rising up. Rambam saw this and warned them and used the story of Abu Isa as a dire warning. So we have this information from Rambam's letter to Yemen, and it tells of this story. So Abu Isa's army is approaching Baghdad, and the Sultan of Baghdad sent out local rabbis to negotiate with him and to see if he was actually truly the Messiah. And according to Rambam, the rabbis of Baghdad concluded that this uneducated craftsman could not possibly be the Messiah, and they interrogate him and his followers and conclude that for sure he hadn't performed any of the miracles that would herald in the Messiah, and they say that he's not. The Sultan then actually pays off all of his followers to go away. Right? And Rambam actually then points out that after this invasion threat ended, the Sultan actually sends men and recovers the money that he gives. And because of that, the story ends for Abu Isa. So the death of Abu Isa comes around 755 when he joins a failed revolt and is killed after being captured. And his followers actually refuse to believe that he's dead. They believe that somehow he escaped and he fled to a cave in the mountains, and that he'd reappear when the Messianic era was right to arrive. And some of his followers believed it so strongly that they established a branch of Judaism, a sect of Judaism, the Isavites, and they moved to Damascus in Syria and continued practicing for about 300 years after Abu Isa dies. And it's an amazing end to this story. But what you see from all three of these is that only because the people wanted to believe it did it actually come to be. Without that, these three people are just crazies. They need to have followers who really believe and want the Messianic era to come about. And that's part of the danger of false messiahs. See you next time.